Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Geib. I'm a Master Gardener. I've been a Master Gardener for about 9 years. I had a wonderful opportunity to go up to the International Master Gardener Conference up in Oklahoma, or excuse me, not Oklahoma, Kansas City. And Kansas City Chiefs fans are going to hate me now. Where I got to learn, sit in on a presentation that was extremely informative, talking about companion planting and the science behind it, if there is any. So, what we're going to be talking about tonight, for the most part, what is companion planting? Is there any actual science behind it? That's one of the big things. Everybody hears everything, so we never really know if we've got science behind us. Talk about some of the benefits for it, and then talk about some specifics on various plant partnering that we can actually do. So, what is companion planting? Companion planting is planting two different varieties of plants, or two species of plants, to get some benefit, either from pests or other insect benefits, either attracting some beneficials or repelling off some of the pests, or it's actually planting stuff together to try and improve the soil and soil structure. Now, is there any science behind it? Here's the fun part. You tell a PhD student that you want to go do companion planting, and they're going to look at you and go, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, because that's all hearsay and old wives' tale, and I don't want my research associated with an old wives' tale. So what do? They change the name of it. There's lots of research out there on companion planting under different names. That's the key thing. The person I was listening to for the lecture, she went through and found all the different words and verbiages that they've been using to actually create this plant partners, is one of them that they use. Also interplanting and polyculture. All of these are different verbs or names strictly for companion planting that we've always been doing. So, there's a lot of benefits to it. We're talking reduction in pest pressure, attracting beneficials for insects. A lot of times we can reduce some of the weed pressure that we have, shading off the ground so that weed seeds can't germinate. There's benefits in the form of improving soil structure, nutrient levels in the soil, removing diseases from the soil. And there's a lot of different things that we can do with companion planting that is very useful and beneficial in our gardening aspects. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to talk about all of these. So I'm going to talk to basically two of them. We're going to talk mostly in the way of insects. Okay? I'll have a reference later on in the talk regarding a book, which is my speaker that I was listening to. The book that she's put out is an extremely well-researched book and has a lot of good information. And if you want to go find out some more of the benefits of some of these others topics, you can go ahead and read the book. So, okay. Now, companion planting, lots of benefits. There are a couple downsides. Okay, we're usually planting a lot closer spacing than we normally get when we do our normal vegetable gardening or gardening in general. What this causes is a little bit of pressure between the plants fighting over resources. Now, a lot of times when we're doing companion planting, though, we're doing a particular plant to increase the nutrient in the soil so that it's not a problem for the other plant. So a lot of the resources in the way of food and light sometimes are not too much of an issue. The big problem that we run into around here is water. Because we're running a lot more plants, we're actually needing a little bit more water. So, we're needing to increase our watering amounts, 25-40% more, just to make sure that we actually do have enough moisture in the soil that the plants can actually access. Okay? There's a little bit of extra work. We're talking, we're planting twice as many plants in this area, so that's another whole set of plants that we need to either start from seed, grow, plant them, tend them until they're big enough size to deal with. And the other big problem that we run into a lot of times around here is timing. Some of these companion plants, especially if we're talking about ones that for as cover crops or something to remove diseases from the soil, a lot of times you let them grow to a certain point and you chop them back and kill the plant. The problem is some of that timing a lot of times is not going to work well for us because we're mostly a shoulder season type vegetable gardener around here. Shoulder seasons in winter. So, it's a little hard to get some of those timings down correctly. Now, when we're talking bugs, the first thing we have to worry about is the bugs actually finding our garden. Now, if we're looking for beneficials, that's not a problem. We just want to attract them up. But if we're trying to get the pests, we're trying to make sure that we can avoid how those pests are actually going to get to our garden. Okay? Now, they usually come in two different varieties, either smell or sight. Now, when we're talking smell, we're trying to do a couple of different things. We're either trying to mask the smell of our plants, trying to drive the pests away from our plants, or we're trying to attract in those beneficials. Now, when we're talking about driving away, most people think of things like citronella and stuff. That really doesn't actually drive off the pests. It masks everything to the point where they can't find anything because the smell is so strong. So this is one of the things we really are actually only working with, either masking a plant or attracting in some beneficials. Now, when we're talking site, we've got a couple of things that we're working with. Okay? If we've got a big garden plot, most of us plant is typical garden rows, nice big long rows of a particular variety of plant. That's all we plant in that row, and it makes this nice beautiful runway for the pests to come down and land on, because they're very easy to find. They've done a lot of research on how pests actually find a particular plant, and one of the ways that they do it when they start getting into the site version of it, they'll come in, they'll land on a plant, little feelers on the bottoms of their feet will go, yeah, that's a cabbage plant, I like that. They'll then take off, float around a little bit, land back down on the plant. Check it, yep, it's a cabbage plant. And it's usually about 4 or 5 of these landings, which they call appropriate landings, that they need to get to actually go, yeah, this is a good plant, this is where I want to be. So if we can break that up and break up the appropriate number of landings, a lot of times the pests will go, no, this isn't a good place, let's go somewhere else. Okay? So we want to try and break that up. We can do this by not planting big long rows of stuff. Interplanting a bunch of different varieties, plant stuff that might get in the way of the moths, butterflies, or whatever, landing on those plants and actually getting that good contact on the plant. So, now, good bug or bad bug? Well, believe it or not, there's only about 1% of the bugs that are considered pests to your garden and are considered agriculturally significant to your crops. Everybody's like, that can't be right. Well, yeah, it is. It's just they're very destructive once they get there. Okay? Most of the rest of the bugs we either really don't care about because they are, while they're beneficial to the garden a lot of times, say beetles or termites or ants, things that will actually do some useful stuff in the garden, but we just kind of ignore what's going on in the background. Or they're the beneficials, which are the predators for all that little 1% that we really want to try and have to control. So this is one of the key things when we start talking about pesticide use in the garden. If we're using pesticides just to take care of that 1%, we're wiping out a huge population of bugs that are doing a lot of good in our garden. We want to make sure that we keep that biodiversity of everything in that garden space there if at all possible. As most of you all know, insects usually come in at least 2 phases, some form of a larval stage and then some form of an adult stage. There can be a couple of different stages in between these also, but those 2 stages are usually the key ones. The larval stage is usually a lot of times a caterpillar type stage. A lot of times caterpillars are very destructive. Okay, so we want to try and worry about the destruction phase of an insect's life as much as possible. Okay, if we can prevent it from getting to the destructive phase, we don't have to worry about it. So if we take it in the adult phase when they're trying to lay eggs and that sort of stuff, that's actually the best time to do preventative type care. So we don't have to go in and try and work on killing off the actual insects once they're getting into that destructive phase. Okay, so how do we attract the good bugs? That large percentage of bugs that we actually want to keep in our garden. For the most part, bugs are going to need the same three things that we need: food, water, shelter. Now, water is a little bit on the iffy side on some bugs, but it just depends. Food, most of the bugs that we actually have that are predators in our garden, one of their stages is also the destructive phase for the pests, but a lot of times that adult stage, they actually aren't eating nearly as many of the pests as they are at a different stage in their life. A lot of times we're looking at bugs that will end up actually needing things like pollen and other sources of food besides whatever they feed off of. So we need to try and make sure that we've got a good habitat for all stages of those good bugs' lifestyle to make sure that we're good to go. Okay? Shelter. Most of us, when we get done with the gardening season at the end of the year, mow everything down, and get rid of it, throw it all in the compost pile. The problem with that is a lot of times it wipes out all the habitat that the bugs are trying to use to stay over in winter. Both the good bugs and the bad bugs. The thing is, if we keep the habitat there for the good bugs and the bad bugs, when the springtime comes around, the good bugs are already there with the bad bugs. And so they can kind of keep that population of the bad bugs down under control a lot easier than having them breed for a couple of weeks before the beneficials can come in and start taking care of the population. So if we can keep them in our gardens all year round, that's the best thing we can do. So not only are we trying to do it over winter, but also during the summer. A lot of times they're going to need some shade, things like that, things to keep from being eaten by other predators, larger predators like birds and whatnot. Okay. Water, for the most part, a lot of the smaller predators that we like in our garden don't really need water, but things like butterflies and moths and bees, all of our pollinator type stuff, do need a lot of times to have a water source. Now, usually this is not good to have a straight open bucket of water. Okay, easy. It's nice and easy, but it's it can drown a lot of times. If I don't know how often I go out to water my animals, and I've got a tray of water out there, and I find dead bees and butterflies in it because they've gone in and drowned. So, best thing we can do is have usually like a bird bath or something like that, filled with sand and gravel. Okay, that nice wet sand, wet gravel is a very good source of water for things like butterflies and bees. They can't drown in it, and they can get the water source that they do need. Now, this is one of those slides that everybody loves. Lots and lots of different recommended varieties of plants. These plants will attract a lot of good beneficial bugs. A couple of them will help repel bugs. Okay, this is going to be in your handout, so you don't have to worry too many of them down. But you've got a lot of good varieties of plants, some of which are just there for beauty. Some of them are there to actually eat or use in our kitchens. Things like rosemary, basil, a lot of these plants have a lot of good uses for us in the kitchen, but are also very beneficial to attracting other bugs into our garden like we need. Trap crops. This is kind of one of the more interesting things. Just like you and I, bugs like a particular type of food more than anything else. Now, when we're talking things like squash bugs, there's a particular variety of squash that squash bugs love. And they'll go to that over any of the other varieties if they're available. And so the nice thing about this is we can put these trap crops out, suck most of the pests over to that crop, and then we can handle the pests over there in one of two ways. We can either kill off the pests, or we can just let them sit there and let Mother Nature take over. It's your choice at that point. Assume that trap crop, though, will not produce anything, and very often will die. Okay, because it's going to have so much pest pressure on it. So a lot of times what we're going to want to try and do is not only just have, like one of a particular variety over there for a trap crop, but we want to actually add a couple of them and have a couple backed up, say inside where they're not being attacked, ready to go transplant out once that one trap crop is wiped out. Okay? Now, like I said, we can either leave the bugs there, let Mother Nature take care of them, or use pesticides. Now, if we're going to use pesticides on our plants, understand, we're trying to wipe out all the life on those plants, depending on what we're using. So we have to be very careful of what we use, and also we want to make sure that if we do use something that has a persistence to it, we want to make sure that we either hose it down later, maybe knock some of that persistence off so that we don't get poison out some of the predator or the pollinators and that sort of stuff in there, or slough cover them up once the pests get in there and try and keep them contained in there until we can get that pesticide to naturally slough off the plant. Okay, trap crops. Couple of different variety sections here that we've got. Cabbage and collards. Okay, collards will attract the cabbage moths or diamondback moths much more than they will the actual cabbage. And so you can plant the collards. Collards get eaten. Your cabbage don't. One of those nice little things. Cowpeas and tomatoes help prevent stink bugs. Now, I don't know if this will be all stink bugs or if it's just the green stink bugs. I haven't seen any literature that says it's all stink bugs, but I had a very bad infestation of harlequin bugs on my tomatoes this year. So next year I'm going to be planting a lot of snow peas along with my tomatoes, see if I can pull all the harlequin bugs and all the other varieties of stink bugs I might have off of my tomatoes. So, if you've got pepper maggots, there's a hot cherry peppers supposedly will attract the pepper maggots pretty well. I've never heard of pepper maggots until I've read about them, but we might have them. Now, here's the more interesting one, especially coming up now that we're getting close to fall. Cole crops and nightshades, okay, specifically the cole crops. So we're looking at lettuces, we're looking at some of the brassicas, some of these types of cooler weather crops. Planting radishes and mustards around these will help pull off flea beetles, okay, which is a very useful thing. I know my eggplant every year, which is a nightshade, always gets flea beetles. Now I have a way to prevent the flea beetle damage on my eggplants. So kind of one of those neat things. If I can pull those flea beetles off, I don't have to worry about them destroying my eggplant. Harlequin bugs. Mustard's supposed to attract them, so that's going to be another thing I'm going to be trying to work with next year, is trying to pull off those harlequin bugs onto some mustard to get them away from my tomatoes. Now, when we're talking hiding plants, remember I talked about those trying to prevent the runway effect in your garden. So we're trying to interplant different varieties of plant next to each other. So a broccoli and a cabbage and then maybe something else. You plant a lot of different plants right next to each other instead of a long row of them. This helps hide them. Also, you plant things like, say, dill next to a lot of these plants, because dill is a nice tall plant, nice and feathery, won't shade them out too much, but because they're big, tall, feathery, they get in the way of all the moths coming in to try and land on your cole crops a lot of times, especially your brassicas. So, this is one of those little things that works well for hiding them, because you're hiding the main plant that you're trying to keep nice and steady with something that's a little bit, useful to have, dill for your kitchen, but it also prevents the bad bugs from getting into your other plants. The plant list that we have on that previous page is going to be pretty much the same one to look for different varieties. Now comes the fun one. Every time I give a vegetable presentation, I always get the same question. How do I get rid of squash bugs? And my answer so far has been, suck it up. There's nothing you can do. Change of plants. I've actually found some useful information on this because of companion planting lectures. Okay? Now, when we're looking up here, picture on your upper right is a picture of some squash bug eggs. They're usually about 1/16 of an inch around, kind of a gold color, usually put together in a clump of eggs. Those eggs will hatch. You see a couple of the small little nymph stage squash bugs right there. A lot of times they'll be green or like a light brown or a light gray. So that's about the easiest time to get rid of the squash bugs. Okay. Tape on your hands so the sticky side's out. You can come in, tap the eggs, pull the eggs off of the underside of the leaves, and it'll suck those eggs right off, and you can go ahead and squash the eggs, kill off the squash bugs before they hatch. If you have squash bugs that have just hatched and are in the nymph stage, you can use something like an insecticidal soap that's reasonably non-toxic to a lot of other stuff. It's more of a contact killer, and so at that stage, squash bugs can be killed with an insecticidal type soap, which isn't too bad. Once they get up to the big stage that you see in the upper left, almost nothing will kill them. Okay, except even the real hard pesticides have a hard time killing those. Okay. Now the other thing that we run into with squash a lot of times is squash vine borer. These are the ones that drive you absolutely insane, because your squash plant will be doing beautifully one day, and the next day it will be dead. And the reason is because that little nasty black and orange moth on the lower left will sit there, lay a single egg at the base of your squash vine. The egg will hatch. Caterpillar will immediately burrow into the center of your squash vine and then start its life stage of burrowing its way through your squash plant. And at some point in time, it's growing big enough, it will, as it eats its way up through the vine, it will eat all of the capillary tubes that go along the squash vine, and from that point on, the squash plant dies. So that's the problem. And because it's inside the plant, nothing can really touch it. Okay? So it's one of those hard things to avoid. So what do? First thing, plant blue Hubbard squash. Both the squash vine borer and the squash bugs will go after the blue Hubbard squash before they would go after any other variety of squash. Okay? I think their next favorite variety of squash is the Black Beauty zucchini. And I have this from personal experience. I've had planted varieties of squash and zucchini. The only one that ever got squash bugs was the Black Beauty, which is, of course, our recommended variety for around here. Yes, ma'am?
How many should you plant?
I would probably plant 2 or 3, probably on either side of the garden, just to try and pull them away from your garden. Also, make sure that birds can get to them, because birds are one of the big eaters of squash bugs, too. Okay. Planting nasturtiums. Okay. Plant your squash out, plant a bunch of nasturtiums around it. This will help hide that squash plant. So if you plant the pretty flowers around your squash plant, it kind of hides that squash plant, and the blue Hubbard squash will be attracting them elsewhere. So that prevents most of the squash bugs from getting to your plants, and at that point you can go ahead and handle the few that do show up on your plants, usually. The other big eater of squash bugs is spiders. Okay? Now we're not talking the web spiders, we're talking more of the ground spiders, things like wolf spiders, things like that. They are one of the few creatures that will actually eat squash bugs, from what I understand. Okay? So we're going to want to track those. So things like red clover or some sort of low-growing ground cover will be a good habitat for the spiders to get into. I've personal experience recently of having to go in and weed through an area that was very overgrown looking, and there was multiple times where I squealed like a little girl as I reached in to pull out some weeds, and a wolf spider, about that big around, like running right across my hand. So, I hate spiders, but I'm like, I will live with them, especially since they eat squash bugs. So now whenever I find wolf spiders, I try and take them over to my garden and say, here's a good place to grow. I will guarantee you I won't hurt you here. Next trick, plywood or cardboard. Now the reason I say plywood and cardboard for this trick will work. The problem is our winds a lot of times will pick it up. So if you're going to put cardboard down, you'll have to probably put a brick on top of it. But you place either a piece of plywood or cardboard down right next to your squash plant, cover a section of the ground, come out the next morning, nice and early, We're talking like sunrise early, unfortunately. Pick up have with you a nice big bucket of good soapy water. Pick up that board, and you'll find a large population of squash bugs on the bottom. Squash bugs overnight like to hide up underneath stuff. Usually it's like leaf litter or stuff, whatever's in your garden, but if you put a board under there, they seem to like that very well. So now you've got all these squash bugs, pull it over top of your bucket of water, and you send them all to Jesus. and get rid of them. The soapy water will kill the squash bugs. Okay? But they have to drown in it more than anything else. Okay? Now, for squash vine borer, the only real preventative method besides trap cropping is you take aluminum foil and you wrap it around the first 4 to 6 inches of the stalk, and that will prevent the squash vine borer from laying an egg where the caterpillar can actually bore into it. They hit that aluminum foil and they can't actually dig through that, from what I understand. Tomatoes. Everybody loves to grow tomatoes. And then everybody runs into one of these nasty little critters after they realize that half of their tomato plant has just been eaten. These are tomato hornworms. Everybody hates tomato hornworms. Okay? Now, they come from a beautiful sphinx moth. So, beautiful moth pollinator. Not a bad problem. Problem is the hornworms that they come through. Now, because hornworms are almost identical in color to your tomato plant, you almost cannot find them until they've done massive damage onto your plant. And usually the way you find that out is half of your tomato plant's gone, and you'll find the frass or the droppings of the caterpillar on the lower leaves. That's about the only way you'll realize you've got some hornworms around. So go out and get yourself a blacklight flashlight. Tomato hornworms fluoresce under blacklight. I've found tomato hornworms, less than a ½ inch in length using a blacklight. It's wonderful. You're like, ha, gotcha, chicken food for the morning. But that's one of the easy ways to get rid of tomato hornworms early. Okay. We're also looking to try and attract pests for the tomato hornworms. The tachyid fly, I believe is what they call it, will lay its eggs in the tomato hornworm. The eggs will hatch. The baby larval stage of the fly will burrow into the tomato hornworm and eat it from the inside. So it's always a nice thing to go, yeah, you eat my tomato plant, that's what you get. So the other problem that we have a lot of times with tomatoes is varicillium wilt. And one of the nice things is you can plant a cover crop to get rid of varicillium wilt. Now, as small gardeners, for the most part, we're always told to rotate your gardens, especially if you've got a virus or something like that. The problem is, if we've got a small garden, we can't pull the tomatoes off of this garden plot for 3 years while the virus naturally dies off. So, planting oat or rye works very well at eliminating the virus from the soil. So you plant it, let it grow, cut it down, and get rid of it, and it wipes out the virus in the soil. So it's one of the really neat things. Question?
Over the winter?
Whenever you can. Okay, you can plant it right along with your tomatoes to help keep the varicillium wilt out of your soil. And also, a lot of times, especially if you do like a winter rye, you can do it over the winter so that you can be planting next spring with your tomatoes. You'll harvest it down, later in spring or early spring. So, trap crops to help go ahead and pull off some of your other big pests that we get, including flea beetles, harlequin bugs, thrips. A lot of times are a big problem with tomatoes. We can use basil to go ahead and mask the tomatoes and keep those hidden from the thrips, also from armyworms. So now, a lot of these, those are just two of the big specific ones. There's a couple of varieties of plants that are used for multiple things for various different reasons. So we're looking at dill. Dill is a beautiful plant, grows wonderful around here, especially in spring and fall. All right, keeps cabbage moss off of your cole crops. Okay, this is that breaking up that appropriate landing site a lot of times. Okay, you plant it with lettuce, and it attracts the aphids away from the lettuce, which is, I found, kind of an interesting one. Colorado potato beetles, which we do have a big problem with around here. It can help that for getting them away from your eggplants. Okay? And it's also a very good pollen source. If you're looking at flowers, when we're looking for pollen sources, like I said, a lot of these beneficials that we're looking for to feed pollen to, they need lots of little flowers. Not a big flower, but a little flower. So not like not a hibiscus for a lady beetle to have some pollen. You want like a little dill flower, which is a very small flower, but a lot of them. Okay, so that's where dill is especially good at. Okay, thyme, a lot of the same thing. It's a very good pollen source for a lot of plants once it starts blooming. Okay, it's a very good habitat for things like spiders. Okay, because it's a very dense, bushy thing, and spiders like to hide under it. All right, helps with armory worms for your tomatoes, and also helps with cabbage worms on your cole crops. Now, this is the book that most of this was taken from. This is about a 250-page book. It has 9 pages of bibliological references. So we're talking hundreds of references for scientific studies that she's quoting in this book. So this is a very thoroughly researched book. It's one I would highly recommend. Author is Jessica Wallister. Okay, book is available at the library. So if you're cheap and you don't want to pay for it, you can go get it at the library. I have my own personal signed copy since I actually had her autograph it when I was up at the conference. She's also written 2 other books. Okay, Attracting Beneficial Insects into Your Garden and Good Bug, Bad Bug. This way you can you can learn what the 1% of bugs are that are bad, as opposed to the rest that are a lot of times beneficial. So I would recommend all 3 of her books. The way she researches stuff is excellent. Okay, we've got our usual website that you can go to. The handouts for this presentation will be on there through one of the links. If we're looking for vegetable resources, we can go up to the Aggie Horticulture website. There's a link for vegetable selections there. It gives a lot of good information on vegetable varieties and growing various types of vegetables. As Master Gardeners, we're on YouTube and Facebook. All of our programs that we do, for the most part, back to the public, we've been recording them and then putting them on YouTube. So after a couple of weeks, they're usually on the YouTube channel, and you can just go in and watch whenever you need to. So, any questions?
What conferences did you go to?
What conference? It was the International Master Gardener Conference. So, other questions? Come on, I talked for 40 minutes and no questions.
So John, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You talked about dill.
Yes.
You referenced it in some cooler weather crops.
Yeah.
My dill dies down in the winter.
Yep.
Is that so?
It's a cool, not a cold weather crop.
Okay.
Okay, so come here September, mid to late September, it'll start bloom. You can really start growing dill again, and it'll grow until first frost, pretty much. And then in spring it comes up nicely and it runs until it gets really hot, or the swallowtails eat it to the ground.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
As far as the cover crops, you said for attracting the bugs to destroy it. Can
Yes.
you rototill it?
Depends on the crop. Some of them you just do a chop and drop. So you chop it at the ground level and just drop it and leave it in place. Some you can till in. A lot of one of the things that they've been learning over research recently, there's the fungal growth that you get in the soil a lot of times is becoming almost a single mass as almost a living organism. And so a lot of the new research is suggesting that the less you can disturb the soil, the better. So if you don't have to till, don't.
Okay.
So. Yes, ma'am.
Any recommendations for mealy bugs?
Recommendations for mealybugs? Not that I know of.
Burning things down other than
Yeah, not that I know of. You may want to check her book. I didn't see anything, I don't remember anything specific. But that may be, maybe check her Good Bug, Bad Bug book. That might have some good reference on it. Yes, sir.
What's the YouTube channel y'all talk about?
The what?
YouTube channel,
Our YouTube channel? It is Big Country Master Gardeners.
just big country.
Yep. Other questions? All right, thank you very much.